Imagine if today was the day your idea changed someone's life. Imagine if you could help someone pay for college, help your community build a new playground, or help a child make it to that dream competition. With GoFundMe, it's all possible. GoFundMe is the world's #1 fundraising platform trusted by over 190 million people. Every week, ordinary people meet their goals and do extraordinary things. Your ideas matter. GoFundMe isn't just for emergencies. Want to raise money for your kid's soccer team or raise funds for a small business, a creative project, or event? GoFundMe helps you turn ideas into reality. And help adds up. Fundraisers you start for someone else raise up to 5 times more. So think right now, who could use your help? Change rarely comes from waiting. It comes from someone deciding, today I'll start. Don't wait for someone else to bring change. Today, start your fundraiser in just minutes at GoFundMe.com. That's GoFundMe.com to start your fundraiser. GoFundMe.com. This is a commercial message brought to you by GoFundMe.
Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
They're back. Today, MPs from across Canada are taking their seats once more in the House of Commons, and they have a packed agenda for the fall as the Carney government looks to reshape Canada's economy amid our trade war with the United States. The feds are preparing an investment and austerity budget, and they've promised to put forward new strategies for housing, trade, and the environment. Now, before the fall sitting began, the Prime Minister also announcing the first wave of projects that he's recommending for fast-tracked approval to cushion our economy, with many other projects being flagged for the future. The first 5 are mainly focused on energy development, mining, and expanding the Port of Montreal, while the feds are also eyeing possible initiatives on high-speed rail, Ontario's Ring of Fire, carbon capture, and they are leaving the door open to a future pipeline. I'm Cormac Mac Sweeney, and today on The Big Story, I'm speaking with Laurie Williams, a political scientist at Mount Royal University, who's going to help me tee up all the action we can expect this fall. Laurie, thank you very much for joining us.
Well, it's great to be with you, Cormac.
So this is going to be the first real full sitting of Parliament for Mark Carney as Prime Minister, and this time he'll have a full-time official opposition leader in place across from him on the floor of the House of Commons. How feisty do you expect this sitting to be?
Well, based on Pierre Poilievre's response to the news of these projects that the federal government has got in place, news that's been welcomed by virtually every premier across the province, Pierre Poilievre is very much going to be an opposition leader and going to be critical of the government at every turn. So clearly, I think it's going to be combative. And I think there are going to be a lot of questions raised by all of the opposition parties about some of the things that the government is doing that weren't signaled during the election period. Some of the folks, for example, who voted Liberal, who had previously been NDP voters, may find some of the austerity measures questionable, and some of or maybe we'll question the balance between energy and the environment, or at least oil and gas energy and the environment. So I think there are going to be a lot of questions raised in Parliament. And even though Mark Carney's going into this with wind in his sails, he's got a budget to get through, and I think there are going to be challenges.
Let's dive a little bit deeper into that. Let's look at the issue that has been, for 2025, the main issue that's been in focus, and that is the U.S. trade war. How will that factor into the fall sitting of Parliament, and how important is it for Prime Minister Mark Carney to get some sort of deal on sectoral tariffs?
Well, the problem is that there's no way to ensure that will happen. So the alternative, and that's clearly where a lot of energy has been going, the alternative is to try to shore up the economy so that there is some offset of the losses in terms of trade with the United States, to provide compensation for those individuals and industries that are being affected negatively by the tariffs. And at this stage, it looks like the best that Canada can hope for is that things won't get too much worse as the CUSMA agreement is being renegotiated. The the focus, I think, will be less on whether or not the prime minister gets a better deal with Donald Trump. I think most Canadians recognize that he is unpredictable and difficult to deal with. So I think the focus will probably turn to the things that are seen as more under the prime minister's control. And again, there may be questions that emerge there that make governing in a minority situation a bit more difficult.
But how much runway is Carney going to get from voters before he has to prove something on the U.S. file? I mean, he was elected earlier this year on the promise of being the guy to negotiate with President Trump. And you know, whether you agree with the official opposition or not, he's facing attacks from the conservatives for not getting that job done, for not fulfilling on that promise and expectation from voters.
I don't know that it's so much that people will judge the prime minister harshly for not dealing more effectively with Donald Trump. I think they recognize that he's unpredictable and difficult to deal with, and that anybody as prime minister would have those same difficulties. Bigger question is going to be what's happening in Canada with respect to some of these initiatives to stimulate the Canadian economy, increase other trade relationships, and keep the Canadian economy running more or less healthily. The rubber's going to really meet the road when people start to feel the effects of these the tariffs or the negotiations of the new CUSMA deal. If that starts to affect a large number of Canadians economically, as we see time and again, in tough economic times, it's really difficult for whoever's in government.
Now, Lori, polls have shown that Canadians' priorities are shifting. Donald Trump has consistently throughout the year been the number one issue for Canadians, but now he's number 4, according to some polls, behind, you know, the more traditional kitchen table issues Canadians have, like the cost of living, housing, crime, things like that. The government's hoping to start to make a shift as well by addressing some of those concerns and kicking it all off with a new housing strategy that's supposed to be unveiled this week. Is that going to be a potential winner, or do things like housing take a long time to really get off the ground, and it may take a while for Canadians to actually see any results from promises like that? And could that be an area of weakness for the Liberals?
Yeah, I think that's going to be the great challenge, whether we're talking about these new projects that the federal government has announced or the housing initiatives. We may see jobs in the short run connected with those initiatives, but we're really coming out of a deep hole when it comes to housing, and to try to make a difference in terms of accessibility to housing, that's not going to happen in the short term. And so as people struggle economically, I think it's going to get more and more difficult for Mark Carney. I think his personal popularity and certainly his government's support is going to start to wane as people struggle more with some of those issues. Other issues, for example, crime, if some of these initiatives like the bail reforms that we're hearing are going to be part of this session as well, those might yield more short-term results, if only because the government is actually taking seriously a concern that Canadians have really, really sort of cottoned on to. The reality is that the crime stats show that things are actually getting better, but a lot of folks aren't seeing or feeling that. So knowing that the government takes seriously that crime is an issue that does concern people, that they want it to be addressed more effectively, that both helps the government and actually sort of pulls the rug from underneath the Conservatives, because that was one of the main criticisms that they were successful at, not only during the election, but since then as well.
And we're also seeing a shift from the government when it comes to the environment and climate issues from what we saw under the Trudeau government, with this package of projects that the government's focused on. You know, they do try and highlight the environmental aspects of it, and they try and stress things like carbon neutral or carbon capture storage for a potential future project for Alberta that could be linked to any possible new pipeline. But it's a different approach, because we're also hearing reports from people like Reuters saying that the government could be looking at getting rid of the emissions cap, something that Alberta has long pushed for. So what are we expecting on this new climate strategy that the government plans on putting forward?
Well, the key is going to be to show that balance between energy and the environment. So we do know that Mark Carney has signaled that he's willing to remove the emissions cap, but in exchange for other environmental commitments on the part of the oil and gas industry. And this isn't just lip service. The balance between energy and the environment is something that at least the big players in Alberta's energy industry have taken quite seriously for a long time. Now, whether carbon capture and storage is going to be the solution that some are hoping for, other initiatives, both cleaner production and cleaner consumption alternatives are being developed by those big industry players as well. Put all of that together with the fact that the emissions cap was seen as deeply unfair, and many economists said that it wasn't the most effective policy. If the federal government can show how other policies would be more effective and would have less in the way of concerns about fairness, or because of course that particular cap applied only to the oil and gas industry, not to other industries, it was seen as deeply unfair. Regionally as well as in terms of the sectors involved. I think another more balanced economic policy could be saleable, but we know that there are lots of questions being raised, even within the Liberal caucus, about whether that balance is being struck in the right way.
Yeah, to the point where some MPs have started an environmental caucus to push the government in that direction. So, I mean, you know, it wasn't that long ago that we were all in and very focused on Paris climate targets and things like that. And the government, to be clear, has not backed away from those targets. They still aim to hit those targets. But could this be another area where there might be problems for the Liberals when, you know, people are still seeing the effects of climate change, having terrible wildfire seasons this summer?
Yeah, no question that these are going to be challenges for the government, and not just within its own caucus, but particularly amongst some of the opposition parties whose support they may need for the initiatives that they want to put forward. So there are discrepancies between some of the things that were promised during the election campaign. There is dissension within the ranks of the Liberals, and there's a budget that's going to be a bit of a challenge for the government to get through. So this is not going to be an easy session. It'll be a real test of Mark Carney's ability to negotiate support, to compromise, to try to balance all of the priorities that he's got in place. And he's doing so in a really difficult economic climate. So it's not going to be easy sailing for him, but it'll also be a real test of his leadership.
We'll have more in a moment on The Big Story with Laurie Williams, a political scientist with Mount Royal University. Now, I did want to talk to you about the budget. It's going to be one of the key pieces of legislation for the fall sitting. And for months, the Prime Minister has said that he's going to be splitting this budget in two. There's going to be the capital side and the operational side. On the capital side, he says he wants to invest heavily. On the operational side, he wants austerity. He's going to make some big cuts. So do you think Canadians will be understanding and agree with the austerity measures that are in place, given the uncertain economic times we're in? Or do you think that maybe there could be a fight on the government's hands here, especially if Canadians start to notice an impact to services that they rely on?
I think even before Canadians notice the ultimate impact of whatever those operational cuts are, these cuts are things that somehow the Liberal government has to get some opposition members to vote in favor of. And I can't see the Conservatives supporting them, given what we're seeing so far from Pierre Poilievre. Certainly NDP members are going to be a little reluctant to join with the government on some of these issues, although because of the fact they don't have a leader and they certainly don't want to go into another election, they might sort of be willing to make a trade or an exchange on things. It's hard to see whether the Bloc would support some of those. So again, I think it'll be a real test of Mark Carney's leadership, and it'll be interesting to see what kinds of trade-offs he's willing to engage in to get that support. It's not going to be a simple matter, because we've got a lot of cuts coming in areas that are not going to be well received by either the NDP or the Bloc, and the Conservatives, at least at this stage, don't look like they're particularly willing to support the government.
However, is that tricky for the Conservatives? I mean, under Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, they've long said that they thought the public service was bloated, and now they have a prime minister who agrees with them and says, yeah, it is bloated. So if they're going to oppose this, do they have to pick on something smaller then to put up that battle? And for the general public, I mean, obviously public sector unions and unions in general won't be happy about these cuts. But could Canadians maybe cut the Liberals slack and say, yeah, we understand why you're doing this?
Well, that's the risk. Of course, if the Conservatives vote against the budget, that's obviously a confidence motion, confidence vote. There would be another election. And given that the Liberals have sort of taken over some of the territory, some of the successes, if you like, some of the things that won votes for the Conservatives in the last election, it would be a big risk to go to the electorate saying, well, these are not the cuts we would have done. Yeah, bail reform is in place, but it's not enough. And yeah, you went to the polls a few months ago, but we're going to call another election. Now, that would all be very difficult for them to sell to their supporters. So it's going to be a very interesting session, simply because it's very much up in the air what's going to be in that budget, what kinds of concessions might be there in order to get the support that the government needs, and how long they can sustain that support for.
Okay, we focused a lot on the government and we have touched on the opposition parties, but let's zero in a little bit more on those opposition parties, because both of them have big leadership questions hanging over their heads for the fall sitting. So let's break this down for the Conservatives. Where do they stand on things? Because it appears the polls show that they're creeping up a little bit as a party overall, but there's still that question with the January leadership review for Pierre Poilievre coming up.
I mean, clearly, Pierre Poilievre's personal popularity numbers are much below Mark Carney's. That may change as time goes on, but at the moment, he's double digits behind Mark Carney as preferred prime minister. And one poll recently showed that a majority of Canadians would be ashamed to have Pierre Poilievre as their prime minister. So he's got some ground to make up for on that count. But of course, as Canadians deal with the sort of lingering and growing effects of some of the economic uncertainty that we're under, they're going to be more willing to look at alternatives. All of that said, even if Pierre Poilievre's personal popularity is low, he did do better. His party did better in the last election under his leadership. And there doesn't seem to be a challenger in the wings. So at this stage, it looks as though he's going to win that leadership review in January. But again, a lot can change between now and then. If those numbers for the Conservative Party start to dip, then I think it makes it much more challenging for Pierre Poilievre.
And now there were people within his party telling some members of the media that he was coming out of that by-election with a new tone. Have you noticed much of a new tone from Pierre Poilievre since the by-election and losing his seat in the last election? Or have you just noticed the same old Pierre Poilievre out of the news conferences we've seen since then?
Yeah, the news conference on the by-election night when he won, that did look like a little bit of a different tone. But he seems to have doubled down on the same old since then. And he's in a bit of a bind because that more combative persona was something that obviously resonated with a large number of Canadians leading into the last election. He needs to grow his support without losing those supporters who do like the more combative tone that he typically takes. I think he both needs to look more prime ministerial and present a bit of a clearer sense of what kind of team he would bring to the job, who the others who would be in his cabinet, how he would work with the Conservative premiers that are at odds with him at this point. Those are all questions that I think he's going to have to look at more seriously. But for the moment, he seems to have decided that the tone that he has taken up until this point is a winner for him.
Yeah, and if it plays to the base, I mean, it's the base who's going to be voting in January on whether you stay on as leader. So that makes sense strategically to continue with what works for him and his base at this moment. Now, for the NDP, what are we going to see there? Because they've just have an interim leader in place at the moment. We have no official candidates in the leadership race yet, even though the race has officially begun. So where do they stand in this?
Well, the NDP is in pretty rough shape. Don't even have official party status in Parliament. Their finances are drained, and at least at this point in time, they look significantly decimated. But we are seeing a lot of the folks who voted NDP voted Liberal, normally would have voted NDP in order to stop the Conservatives from winning government. Some of those folks might be having buyer's remorse at this point. They're seeing policies that don't align with the NDP and the partnership that the NDP had with the Liberals under the last government. So I think there's room for the NDP with a good leader to pick up some support going into the next election. And that would be good news, of course, for the NDP, but also good news for the Conservatives. So I think there's a lot of moving ground at this stage of the game, a lot of opportunities, but I think challenges for both the government and the opposition parties.
Do you think the long leadership race is a good thing? Because they're not going to be choosing their new leader till March. So they've got a full fall sitting where they have this leadership race. Is that going to play well, or could that sort of drift interest away from the NDP for a while?
Well, it depends on who puts their name forward and how that campaign is actually conducted. With an effective communicator, somebody really is effective from outside the House, likely somebody's effective at challenging the government, calling attention to what they would do differently and better. They could generate some momentum going into the spring. But again, if we don't have really captivating candidates for the leadership, then it'll be difficult for the NDP to get the media attention they need to generate the kind of momentums and support that they need to do better both in the current Parliament, but also to build a foundation to do better in a future election.
All right, Lori, thanks so much. I really appreciate your time on this.
Oh, great chatting with you.
And that was Lori Williams, a political scientist with Mount Royal University, helping me tee up the fall sitting of Parliament. I'm Cormac Mac Sweeney, and that was The Big Story. You can send us your feedback on this episode or any other episode by emailing us at hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca, or you can leave a voicemail as well at 416-935-5935. You can also check us out on the Seeker app or any of your favorite podcast players. Please rate, review, follow, and share. Thanks for listening.